Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jean, the Digital Event Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. We are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges by creating use of technology. Today, I'm very excited to welcome you to join Finding the Perfect CRM for Your Not-for-Profit with Stephen Molly. Stephen will be going to introduce himself in a minute. So before that, we'll begin with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box, and I'll be here to assist you. If you have any questions during the sections, please also type into the questions box, and Stephen will get them answered by the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible to make it very interactive. But please also note that your comments and questions will not be appear to the entire group. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. The link with the recording and slides will be sent to you in 1 to 2 business days. Finally, I would like to remind you there's a very short survey at the end. Please help us to complete that for an even better experience in the future. All right, enough for me. Now I would like to pass to Stephen for today's section. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It's nice to be here with you. I hope everybody's well and those around you are well as well. So in terms of my introduction, I'll just talk briefly about my professional experience. So my professional career has been spent fundraising in the US mainly, although I've been consulting in Asia Pacific and Europe throughout my career as well. I actually became a professional fundraiser in the mid-1980s, and my professional fundraising experience is largely in not-for-profit organizations in North America, mostly in healthcare. And when I say healthcare, I mean medical centers, medical research centers, and then disease-specific organizations in the diabetes and HIV space. I've had this business called Fundraising Force for the past 8 years. We are 8 years old next month. And Fundraising Force actually offers 2 different types of services. The first type, or the first arm of the business, is fundraising strategy. So we do everything from fundraising, strategic planning, to actually implementation of those fundraising plans. We specifically consult on a variety of fundraising areas, which include everything from direct marketing to major gifts, bequests, trusts and foundations, corporate partnerships, and of course, special events. We also have another side of the business, or another arm, if you will, and that is technology, and that's why I'm here with you today. In the technology space, we do everything from technology searches, again, the topic we're talking about today, to actually project management or implementations of those CRM or other technology platforms. We do not actually configure the CRMs, if you will, for you, but we project manage it. So we're an extension of the staff of the university, the school, or the not-for-profit organizations. I'm going to just highlight the agenda that I had set out that we'll cover today, if that's okay, and then we'll dive into it. So I'm going to start out by offering a brief overview of the different types of products that are available in our market. I'm then going to talk about 6 common misconceptions when an organization goes out to find the right technology. I'll talk about who to involve in your organization. I'm going to offer you a 10-point CRM search process. There are 10 steps. And we'll dive into the detail of each and every step, so you don't have to remember them, because we'll spend most of the webinar on those 10 steps. I'll talk about the important implementation of any technology platform and some of the pain points and pitfalls there. And then I'm going to sum it all up at the end with some key takeaways. So that's the agenda that I set out for today. I want to just pause for a second and thank all of you. I know it's the midday for most of you, and I realize that some of you are actually doing this on your lunch break, if you will. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of you for joining today. And I also want to thank Connecting Up for inviting me to present this and the other webinars that we've got slated to do this year. I really appreciate having this platform, this forum, and of course, the audience. I'm going to start out with a couple of polls. The first one is, does your organization have a CRM? So I would like to have you answer this yes, no, or perhaps you don't know. And I'm just going to pause and let you have time to take that poll. All right, let's see if we've got some results. So it looks like 45% of the organizations represented here today do have a CRM, and it looks like 55% do not, which is probably why you're here, and there isn't anybody who answered don't know, so that's a good thing. Well over half of you don't have what you consider to be a CRM, so I welcome you, and even those of you who do have a CRM, there must be a reason that you're here today. So why don't we go on, if it's okay, to the next poll, which actually asks participants, are you looking for a new CRM? And that's a yes or no question. I'll just give you all a minute to answer that poll, and then we'll go right into the content. Are you looking for a new CRM? So let's see the results there, if that's okay. So it's 80% of the participants, which is an impressive number, are looking for a new CRM, and 20% aren't. So perhaps that 20% are right now quite satisfied or are managing the status quo and just wanted to see how to search for a new technology set. The other 80%, you're in the right place. So thank you for that, and we'll close out that poll and I'll go on to the content. So again, thank you very much. All right, good. So let's talk a little bit about the two types of products that are available in our market. I'll tell you that I've been in Australia for 13 years now, and when I moved here from the US 13 years ago, there was a really limited product set that focused on the not-for-profit university and school sector, and those were largely fundraising platforms. Soon, a number of the CRM platforms came into the market, and they saw an opportunity to certainly capitalize on the nonprofit market. We are a very powerful market in the economic sector here in Australia. There's no doubt about it, with over 50,000 charities here in Australia. We make up a huge amount of the economic sector. So it's no surprise that the number of offerings in our sector have changed over time, and more products have come into play. Let's look at the fundraising platforms that are available in the market first. And those fundraising platforms include IMIS, a product that's put out by ASI, Vega, a product that's put out by VegaWorks out of New Zealand, Thank You, and then we have the Blackbaud products, eTapestry, Razor's Edge NXT, and their big product, Blackbaud CRM. We also have Supporter Hub, a product that is starting to take hold in this market, and there's a product called Clarity. So those are the fundraising specific products. Now, because Fundraising Force are product agnostic, what I would say to you is these are great products. Some of them have a very rich history in the Asia Pac market. Some are relatively new. They all have strong user base, which means that there are lots of organizations using them. None of them have just a few users. Some of them have far more users than others, but nonetheless, they've all got strong user base. I would also say that these products are largely fundraising specific. So if your organization has any programmatic needs, if you're seeking to do things like client work and that sort of stuff, these are probably a bit of a square peg in a round hole for you. They mainly focus on fundraising. I would also say if you're looking for a competitive space, meaning you want to find lots of partners in the market that implement these products, these are probably not the products for you, because these products are largely implemented by the company that manufactures them. And therefore, there's less competition, there's less talent in the space that actually implement them, and so on. Doesn't make them poor products, doesn't make them a bad choice for you. It just is a fact of life for us. Next, I want to look at the CRM products that are available in the market, and there are largely two, and I'll talk about that. And those two platforms are Salesforce, and largely they're not-for-profit pack, and Microsoft Dynamics, and largely they're now not-for-profit pack. These platforms are fantastic at doing fundraising, and they're also fantastic at doing things like services and client work and that sort of CRM management that you might need. So these are more organization-wide products. If you're looking for just a fundraising solution, they would meet your needs. But if you really want something that's more core fundraising, then the products on the other slide might be something that you'll look at. I spoke earlier about a lack of suppliers in the market that implement those fundraising solutions, really just the manufacture of them. Here, it's a different story. In the Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics spaces, you've got lots of partners in the market that implement them. That produces competition, which is a good thing when you're looking at a product, and it also produces a lot more bench strength in the market, which I think is a good thing. So there are pros and cons to everything in life. Fundraising Force are product agnostic. We don't care what solution you choose, just so you choose the best suited solution for your organization. And today I'm going to talk about how you get to that decision. How do you make that decision? What are the things that you need to look at? What tools do you need in your toolbox to actually make that decision? I'm now going to turn my attention to some common misconceptions or perhaps statements that I hear out there in the market. And these are things that I think we need to say less. These are things that I think we need to do less, and things that we probably shouldn't spend a lot of calories paying attention to. The first is, I need to buy technology quickly. I've got to get it done. I'm behind. I should have done this last year. I got to do it quickly. Don't rush to judgment. This process takes time. It takes most organizations 8 to 12 weeks to work their way through. Take the time to do it. You will applaud that pace later on. It's best to spend time making this decision than it is to rush through it. Next is, I've got to have it all. I'm talking to you on a MacBook Air. It's a great laptop. I'm an Apple fan, but quite frankly, I probably use 50% of the functionality on this laptop. I probably didn't need some of the bells and whistles that I bought. Maybe I didn't need all the memory. Maybe I didn't need the MacBook Air and I could have gotten by with an iPad Pro, don't know. But at the end of the day, we sometimes go in and buy technology and we think that we need it all at that moment. You can grow into technology. You can develop over time. You can configure over time. I strongly recommend that you buy what you need today, and then you add on to it in future phases of a project. The next one, product A, and I'm not going to name any of them, the belief that it's the only one available in the market. I've just shown you there's lots of choice. Maybe for your organization, you're going to go out and consider both the fundraising solutions and the CRM platforms, those organization-wide sort of platforms. That's great. You've got choice in this market. Australia is no longer sort of a stepchild market. We have choice. We, as consumers, we've got lots of choice here. We don't have to wait around for the next best thing. It's available here. Second one is product B is the best available. How do you know? How do you know unless you document your requirements and you go out and cast your net and you look at everything very carefully? Don't close your mind going into this believing that something is the best out there because they advertise a lot. Or don't also believe that product A must be good because organization X use it. Well, just because that organization finds it great, yeah, that's a consideration, but it doesn't mean that that's gospel. At the end of the day, you need to look at what's best for your organization. The next one, product C, will work out of the box. Gone are the days that you plug in the technology and it works. Today, nothing comes out of the box. We don't load software on desktops anymore. They're all cloud-based, and cloud-based they should be. Every piece of technology requires some level of configuration. Nothing is plug and play. So please get rid of that misconception. And the last one is, you've used product D before, you liked it, and so that's the one for your new organization. That's not true. Just because, again, it was fitting over here doesn't mean it's going to be fitting at your new organization. So who should you involve in your organization? I strongly recommend that you involve a cross-section of staff on your selection panel. That cross-section of staff can be people at a variety of levels across the organization. This is an opportunity to involve many people. You don't want to involve the entire staff, but you want to involve a focused number of people across the organization and at a variety of levels. It shouldn't just be senior leaders. You want to make sure that you get the opinion and you get the insights of people at different levels across the organization. You do want to involve leadership and you want to keep them well informed. On this selection panel, I strongly recommend an odd number of people. Sometimes that odd number is 5, 7, maybe 9 people. I have had far larger selection panels. Just remember, the more people you involve, the more unruly it can become. And you need to corral people, you need to get people to agree to meeting dates. And so try to do a healthy number for your organization, depending upon the size of your organization, and try to include an odd number just in case there's a vote that's required. It's sort of like the US Supreme Court. You don't want to have an even number of people at the end of the day. You definitely want to involve somebody from finance. You want to involve perhaps a board member. You certainly want to keep the board informed throughout the course of the project as well. All right, let's get into the 10-point process. I'm going to put the 10 points up, but remember that you don't have to remember these because I'm going to dive into the detail on each and every one, and we're going to spend the bulk of the time now in these 10 points. I'm going to show you some examples as well. We'll talk through some other examples, And at the end, I'm happy to answer your questions. So please put those questions in the chat window throughout the webinar. We'll get to those at the end of the webinar. So the very first step in this 10-point process is, I would argue, one of the most important steps, and that's gathering your requirements. I'll talk about how you do that best and how you document those. The second step is conducting market research. I've already done a little bit of that for you by showing you those logos of the products, but there's a lot more work to do, and I'll talk about that and how best to conduct that market research. The third step is you want to send out an invitation to everybody that you intend to invite, and I'll talk about how best to do that. You want to create a request for proposals. You want to have an entire RFP pack that you'll send out to those who accept your invitation. You want to conduct response meetings, and I'll talk about 2 different methodologies to do those response meetings. You want to entertain proposals from your invited suppliers, and I'll talk about that process. You want to entertain demonstrations, and I'll talk about how those are best held and how to not create a circus atmosphere. Number 8, you want to create a sense of negotiation. You want to make sure that these suppliers know that you're talking with a variety of suppliers, and I'll talk about some tips and tricks there. You want to ultimately have that lead to a selection. I said that this is about a 8 to 12 week process, and that will be near the end of the process. And then ultimately you need to create a business case or a business plan that will go to leadership and the board, and I'll talk about that content as well. So that's our 10-point process. That may seem a little overwhelming to you, especially if you represent a small charity. All of this is scalable. I do these for very small organizations, sometimes 1 to 2 to 3 staff people, and I've done them for very large organizations, sometimes 100 to 200 staff. It's all scalable. This process is best practice, and it works for any size organization. All right, let's get into step 1, which is the important requirements gathering. So it's my recommendation that unless you understand your organization, you can't communicate properly to suppliers. You can't expect suppliers to tell you, how much is it going to cost? Can we meet your requirements? Do we have the expertise in your space to deliver to your expectations? So you've got to understand your organization. Now you might say, I've worked here for 10 years. I know our organization. I would challenge you on that, and I would do a requirements gathering exercise and make sure that you do fully understand. I guarantee there are details that you need to articulate to these suppliers, and so going through a process of gathering requirements is important, whether you've worked there for 1 hour or for 10 years. You need to be able to articulate those requirements to suppliers and make sure that they understand your requirements. You have to document them, and I'll show you a document in a second, a bit of a template, if you will, that I'll offer you a view into. And that document needs to articulate these in very clear and concise ways. You also have to understand the depth of the data that needs to be migrated, and you need to be able to articulate that to the suppliers. Is your data very flat and therefore it's quite simple? Or is your data multidimensional and is your migration going to be a bit difficult? Is all of your data in one place, or do you have endless spreadsheets across your organization? I would guess that a majority fit in that latter example. And it's not unusual, I should just reassure you, it's not unusual for organizations to have a multitude of spreadsheets, but you've got to get them all together in one place. This is an example of a functional requirements gathering document. And I'll just walk you through it. This one happens to be focused on major gifts. It's only a couple of rows. It would be many, many, many rows, but it's just an example. You'll see across the top that there is a bit of a key, and that is because we want suppliers to tell us if they meet the requirement through configuration. Do they meet it through customization, which oftentimes means more expenditure? Do they meet it through a third-party application, or do they not meet the requirement at all? All the supplier can do is simply tick a box on the right side, and they can just put a tick mark. That's all they can do. Later on, I'll talk about the RFP where they can offer us more explanation. Here you can see two requirements on this screenshot. Again, it's just a sample, but the first one is that their CRM contains a native ability to track moves management. Now your supplier might say, what's moves management? If they're in our space, they should really know what moves management is in major gifts. And so that's a bit telling. And it's also, we want to make sure that their CRM can track a moves management process, all of the stages of moves management. The second one up there is a dedicated space to track financial details, and those are publicly available financial holdings of our prospect. You'll see that there's a column whether or not that requirement is essential or desired, and that's up to your staff to document whether it is essential or it's desired. And then I've got a phase column. Is that meant to be in phase 1 or phase 2 of the project? You can take this example and create whatever you want for your organization, but at the end of the day, it's just an example to show you how we document requirements for any size charity and how we communicate those out to suppliers. All right, the second step, market research. So market research is done for you to be able to understand the available product in the market. I've already given you the logos of the product available in the market. I didn't include some logos, and I'll tell you why. There are some other organization-wide platforms out there in the market that are just starting to service the not-for-profit sector. They're not quite there yet, so I didn't feel comfortable including their logos. There also are some products that are in the fundraising space, but they're not quite there yet for fundraising functionality, so I didn't include their logos either. It doesn't mean that we're biased against product. Remember, I've said that we're product agnostic, which is why a lot of charities and schools and universities tend to hire a supplier like Fundraising Force. But I just don't feel comfortable including them in a forum like this at this point in time. Perhaps next year, if I present a similar presentation, you might see more logos. Decide whether you want to include fundraising and or CRM, you know, those organization-wide platforms. And I have an and or an or in there. For some organizations here, it might just be a fundraising platform. For others, it might just be organization-wide. For many, it'll be a blend of both, and I think that's fantastic. You want to conduct initial research. Make sure before you create an Excel spreadsheet of suppliers that you're going to invite that you actually do a little bit of research. Go on their websites, look at forums, talk to other charities, talk to staff who have worked on other platforms in the past, and make sure you're comfortable with who you are putting on that invitation list. You also will want to look at various, as I said, forums. There are LinkedIn groups, there are Facebook groups. We've got lots of social media access today, and so make sure you do some research beyond what the suppliers want you to look at. The third step is writing a request for proposals. This document can be quite long. It could be, 20 to 30 pages in length. The document is going to be a match back to your functional requirements. So it's not going to repeat all of them, but those that are most important, you're going to pull out and you're going to ask the supplier to expand beyond that tick mark. Because remember, on the functional requirements document, all they can put is a tick mark after a given requirement. But here, we might want them to expand. So things like data security. Have they ever had a data breach? Is your data going to be hosted in Australia, or is it offshore in another country? Those sort of things, you want the supplier to give you a bit of a narrative response. You're going to ask them to elaborate on any points in the functional requirements document that you want them to elaborate on. Here's an example of an RFP. You can see at the beginning, we have an executive summary, no surprise there. We've got an about section. I've grayed out the name of the charity that this was written for, but you can imagine that we would give a bit about the mission statement, vision, perhaps an overview of the organization leadership and that sort of thing. Then we define the CRM search process. So we walk them through not only deadlines, but each and every step that we're doing to follow a process. We, of course, have a confidentiality statement. Keep in mind, they've already signed your confidentiality agreement when you send out the invitation. We've got our business requirements, which link back to the functional requirements spreadsheet. And then we get into specific things in section 6 that we want them to expand on. And those are things like their background, what their implementation methodology is, how they provide customer service versus customer support, two very different things, ongoing consulting services, a bit about their product, a bit about how their product compares to others in the market. If you're looking for web services and third-party fundraising platform, you'll include that. Payment gateway choice, very important. Data migration, how they do the data migration. How your project compares to others that they've done. How they'll handle any integrations that you require with your finance system, with any other systems that you've got that they must integrate with. What the training options are, and the last section, which they hate to answer, is the costing. So what is this project going to be priced at, and how do they back that up? In the appendix, you'd include some statistics about your data. I talked about the importance of getting an inventory of your data, and that is critical. All right, step 4, you're going to send out invitations after you've done the market research, and as you're starting to get this documentation together, you're going to send out invitations to suppliers. And it's important that when you do that, you base it on the market research, so those that you've decided to go out to. In that invitation letter, you're going to describe the process and the timeline. It bears repeating, and you got to make sure that they are willing to adhere to that timeline. You're driving the bus, and you want to make sure that they are okay with the process and the timeline. You want to set boundaries, and I think that that is that there's a single point of contact. In most organizations where we run the process, we are that point of contact, and that removes any sort of conflict of interest or potential for a supplier to do things like invite people out to lunch or drinks or send gifts and that sort of thing. You want to remove that conflict of interest and make sure that this is an objective process. Every supplier involved, even if it's an incumbent supplier, should have an equal opportunity. It should be a level playing field. You're going to include your confidentiality agreement with this invitation, and if they sign your confidentiality agreement, then they are opted into the process. If they don't return that confidentiality agreement, they are not part of the process. So make that clear in this letter as well. All right, step 5, we're halfway through, response meetings. So I mentioned earlier that there are 2 choices here, and those choices are one-on-one in a group, and fundraising force do it either way, depending upon the client preference. I'll talk about the benefits and the, I guess, the pitfalls of each option. So the first option, one-on-one, the real benefit there is you're not showing your cards. So it's between you and the supplier you're meeting with, and you are answering their questions. You're offering information to them on a one-on-one basis. You're developing a relationship with them one-on-one, and that's fantastic. The downside, there's a pro and a con. The con there is that you have to meet with each supplier separately, so it takes time. And it's about an hour for each supplier. So do you have that time to spend? Perhaps not. And perhaps you'd like the group format. Group format means you meet with all the suppliers at once, and it's 1 hour and it's done. So that's the pro there. Everybody hears one another's questions, and that can be a benefit to the suppliers as well. The con there, though, is that you're showing your cards. So there's no mystery, and that's a pretty big negative. So there's no hiddenness to this process, and that can be a bit of a con. Remember, you're going to answer questions, and you're going to offer insight into the process. You're going to offer insight into your organization, and you're going to offer a bit of openness and transparency no matter which choice you choose. I'd suggest that you really need to respect the supplier's time. Whether you choose one-on-one or a group doesn't matter. Throughout this entire process, you need to respect the supplier's time. You've got to remember that you're not the only organization that they are pitching to. You're not the only organization that they're responding to. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you use supplier's time real wisely. So you want to be on time. You want to end meetings on time. And you want to make sure that you're building a relationship with them. In one case, you're going to end up getting married to this supplier, so you want to make sure that you're being very respectful of them throughout the course of the process. All right, good. 6, so proposals. You're going to have created a selection committee, which I talked about earlier. You're going to accept all proposals by the deadline. If you extend the deadline for some reason, you're going to extend it for every supplier. You don't want to extend it for this supplier because they had difficulty meeting the deadline and not open that up to everybody. Remember, this is a level playing field. You're going to acknowledge that you've received their proposal. You don't want them to be, misinformed or not informed at all. You want to make sure that they understand that you've gotten their proposal and you appreciate their submission. You want to create an evaluation form. We've got lots of examples of those, and those evaluation forms are scored typically on a 1 to 5 basis. Again, there's a key for your selection panel. And you want to make sure that you're scoring them on specific things that are important to your organization. Typically, the table of contents of the RFP can be those different components that you're going to score them on. This evaluation form is different than the one that you'll use in the demonstrations, and it's a really important one. You want to make sure that the selection panel know the exact criteria and that they're all scoring them using the same scale. All right, demonstrations. So you've decided as a selection panel who to invite in from demonstrations. Maybe you've invited 6 suppliers to propose, and out of those 6 suppliers, you've narrowed it down to 3, maybe 4, who knows the number, but you're going to invite a certain number of them in for demonstrations. Those demonstrations need to be to a structured agenda. Whether that structured agenda includes introductions, an introduction of the supplier, them introducing themselves and their services, and then certain things that you want to see in agenda, or maybe it's a free-form agenda where they're coming in to demonstrate things based on what they know about your organization. Just make sure you create an agenda so that you reduce any sort of circus-like atmosphere. Remember, you want to value, again, that investment of supplier and their supplier time. All right, let's imagine you've gotten through the demonstrations and you've narrowed it down to 1 supplier. You're ready to go into negotiations, and you must negotiate. Remember that none of us will pay the price that the supplier suggested the project's going to cost, nor should you. You should negotiate. Remember, it's a competitive market. Remember that they likely don't know who they're up against, and that's a great thing. You want to keep that a mystery. You want to make sure that you remember that you're driving the bus here. So negotiate. Remember that the list price is not the best price. Remember again that you're driving the bus and it is a competitive environment. There are tips and tricks to negotiating. If you're not a great negotiator, you shouldn't leave the negotiations. Find the best person in your organization to negotiate. Remember that some things on the supplier side will be non-negotiables, and respect those. Just like you as an organization will have things that are not negotiable for you. Remember to also consider things like who's going to be on their team to implement your CRM. Remember that you need to understand the skill set of those team members. You don't want somebody new to their business, learning their product, and learning your organization at the same time. You want highly skilled, you want staff of organizations who understand our business and understand our sector. Ultimately, you're going to end up with a contract, and that contract will likely have to be signed by the chair of the board. Before that time, it'll be reviewed by your legal department or your pro bono lawyer. All right, number 9. Ultimately, you're going to end up selecting the preferred platform and supplier. I recommend that you check their referees, make sure that they produce 3. Remember, as you and I do when we interview for jobs, we're going to put forward people that are going to say the most glowing things about us. So it's really important that you check the non-referees. What do I mean by that? You'll know in the market, or you can ring me and I can tell you which charities are using which platform and who implemented them. Ask beyond their reference sheet. As managers, if we're interviewing staff, we wouldn't just call the people on the reference sheet. We would call people who have worked with the prospective candidate in the past. And you'll do the same when you make such an important decision as a CRM and as a CRM provider. You want to speak to former customers. Why did they leave this supplier? What was it about the technology that wasn't fitting? What was it about the relationship with the supplier that wasn't fitting? You really want to dig deep and understand what that is, because you may not want to encounter those pitfalls. You want to select the best. This webinar is called how to select the perfect CRM. At the end of the day, there's nothing that's perfect in the market. It's what's best for your organization that is most important. And all of the steps leading up to number 9 will get you to that decision. All of these components or ingredients will help you determine what is best for your organization. Remember, what's best for your organization might not be best for other organizations, and that's okay. You've determined what's best by going through these steps. Remember that you are ultimately acquiring a relationship. This is not a transaction. You're going to be married to this CRM for the next 8 to 10 years, and you're ultimately going to want to work with this supplier for that time frame. So you've got to make sure that it's the right fit. This is not married at first sight. This is not The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. This is a process that you have to follow to make sure that it is the best fit for you. The last thing is the business case, and this is really where we're going to write a solid business case that's ultimately going to be presented to the board and to leadership. We need to make sure that we cover the process that we followed. We need to make sure that the business case states that we did our due diligence. We need to include the true cost of ownership over the next 3 to 5 years. This is a bit of a summation, if you will, of the process, but put in perhaps different terminology. That first important step is the requirements gathering, and that's really where you're going to understand your requirements. You're going to want to make sure you understand your data. Ultimately, that's going to lead to some search tools, and those include the RFP, the requirements documents, and perhaps a couple of letters that you're going to draft. Ultimately, you're going to present that to the market, and you're going to conduct your supplier meetings, some demonstrations, negotiations, and a contract. And then we're going to get to the important implementation, and that's where the fun really starts. So in terms of the implementation, I recommend that you start with your data and you start early. It's not too early to look at the data now. Not just to understand the volume, which you need to do as part of the requirements gathering, but you really need to understand the cleanliness of your data, how many duplicates you have, and how you're going to handle things like Mr. and Mrs. records, which shouldn't exist in a CRM. People are individuals in a CRM connected as relationships. And so things like that really need to be attended to and attended to early on. Don't wait for the migration to deal with those things. You want to make sure that you've got a precise scope of work. SOW stands for scope of work. You want to ensure that you've got proper participation across the team. You've had that on your selection panel. Now you need to have it on your implementation team. If you don't have project management skills, engage somebody on the outside. I mentioned that we do that. There's lots of us in the market that do that, so you've got choice. Let me just sum up the key takeaways. First, don't overbuy technology. Remember the example I gave about my laptop. There's plenty of examples in charities across the sector. Acquire something you can grow into. You don't have to have it all at the beginning. Ensure that your organization is ready for a CRM. Know what you're looking for and go find it. We've got choice in the market. Understand your requirements so that you can articulate those to the suppliers. Make sure suppliers do understand your requirements before they respond. Separate yourself from supplier influence. You do not want to be influenced and have any conflict of interest. Remember that you're not buying buttonology. You're acquiring a relationship, and this is a relationship that has to last well into the future, perhaps when you and I are long gone from an organization. And if you feel that you are overwhelmed by this, if you feel that you don't have the expertise, if you feel like you are very time poor, I recommend that you do hire a consultant in the market to help run this process for you, and certainly to help you implement the CRM. Again, there are plenty of us in the market that have that expertise and do this for a living. I'm just going to pause now. I note that we've got 10 minutes left, and I'm happy to entertain questions. Perhaps the questions can be read to me, and I'll see if I've got the answers. I'm also going to put up here my contact details, and I welcome emails, phone calls, text messages, whatever it is. Reach out to me, and I do get back to everybody the same day that the comms come in. So I welcome your questions after this webinar. If you're watching this after the fact, or think of a question next week or in the coming weeks, I'm happy to speak with you. So with that, I'm going to pause and take any questions that have come in.
Sure, thank you very much, Stephen. All right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to type into the question box, and we'll be here to get them answered straight away. All right, so we got a question from Rebecca. So she's saying that she's totally new to CRM, and she's actually looking for software solutions for the NFPs to streamline and improve the services. Is there a template or questionnaire or something available to help them with the needs of analyze?
Yes, let me just ask for a little bit of clarity, and I think it's just about the question. So she's saying that she's new to CRM and she needs a template for what again? If you can just repeat that for me, sorry.
Sure. Is there a template or questionnaire to available that help us with the needs analyze?
I think I don't have such a template because organizations that I work with, we start with the requirements gathering, and we ultimately end up, developing what becomes the documentation that goes out to the suppliers. That said, there may be others out there. You might be able to Google and see if there is a template that's available, and others participating here today might put in the chat or the questions window that they have one. I think at the end of the day, we shouldn't oversimplify the process. I'm not suggesting by your question that you're looking to do that. I get that you're really looking to get started. Perhaps what I might suggest also is reach out to me on email or by phone after the webinar, and I'm happy to talk to you more about that and see if I've got something in my tool set that can help you.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, so we have Kelly here. What are your thoughts about some free open source CRMs?
Yeah, I think if you represent a really small charity, and if you don't have money at all to spend on a CRM, it's a better option than using Microsoft Excel, that's for sure. The issue with free is it sometimes becomes more expensive than the word free implies. Even the platforms that offer 10 free licenses or 5 free licenses, whatever it is, at the end of the day, they require configuration to get going. Nothing is out of the box, as I said before. So you need to have somebody help you to get it going, to make sure that it has the base configuration, make sure that your data is properly imported, etc. So free is sometimes misleading. There are a couple of products on the fundraising slide that I did that are low cost or no cost, but you've got to have talent on your team to be able to actually operate them and to get them going. So again, with that one, I'm happy to talk to you offline. If you reach out to me, we can have a conversation and I can advise you more.
No worries. Thank you for that, Stephen. And all right, so we got Cecilia here. So hi, Stephen. I'm from a very small NFP. So what sort of cost models do the major CRM suppliers like Salesforce, Microsoft offer? Is it feasible for small organizations?
Yes, great. I knew that I would get a cost question, and I should. So thank you for that question, and thank you all for your questions. In the products that I've mentioned, there are, as I said, products. So you need to look at costs from 2 points of view. One, what is it going to cost us to implement? And 2, what is it going to cost us annually? What are those licensing costs going to cost us each and every year? So on the 2 slides that I had where I had the logos, there are products that will be free for very small organizations on an annual basis, and that's fantastic. And there are suppliers in the market that implement at very low cost. That's why you want to cast your net widely, and you want to gather proposals from suppliers, and you want to compare costs. You want to ask them those very questions in your RFP and give them an opportunity to pitch, your business for your business, if you will. I think that you can get a CRM implemented in some cases pro bono, and there are some in the market who have been very lucky to do that. But when I say low cost, I'm talking in the low thousands to get a CRM implemented, depending upon your requirements. The last thing that I would say about cost is sometimes we have what I call a champagne taste but a beer budget. And so it's important that you articulate your requirements as quite minimal if you're expecting pro bono or low cost. Otherwise, they communicate that you've got a high budget and it will come in at high cost. So that's a balancing act, and you want to be honest And you want to be able to articulate that in a fashion that it's the information's received and responded to accordingly.
Thank you. So I hope that answered your question, Cecilia. So Heather is actually asking the same question. So Heather, just let us know if this answer your question about the cost. So it looks like many people are very curious about the cost.
Yes, of course, and rightly so.
Yeah. And we have Paul here. So he's actually giving a comment. So he actually attended the last CRM webinars of yours before, and then he found that your advice helped them a lot to determine the right products and set us on the path that lead to the great supplier. So which we have established a long-term relationship. So he would like to say thank you for your pointing us to the right directions before they launch the CRM.
That's very nice. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback, and that's great to hear. And I just want everybody to know I didn't pay you to say that either.
Yeah, lovely. So Heather is actually clarifying the questions about the cost. So how much should it cost to get an external CRM funder to help?
How much? Give me that one more time. I think I missed it.
Sure. So it's how much should it cost to get an external CRM funder to help?
Let me just make sure I understand the question, having heard it a second time. Are you asking about how much it would cost to get an external supplier to run the search for you? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. That depends on the size of the organization. We offer this product at a very minimal cost for small organizations. And, a large scale university, for example, involves a lot more time and it's billed on time. So therefore it's much more expensive for a university. But for smaller charities, it would be very minimal because the time that we invest in it isn't as substantial as larger organizations. So I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one about that. And then, as I said, we're not the only player in the market, so there'll be others that you can compare and contrast us to as well. But we recognize the market that we serve, and I oftentimes argue that our services are very high value for the cost paid. We recognize that you're spending donor dollars, and we want you to spend that wisely on services and not on administrative sort of stuff. So I think you'll find costs are quite competitive in the market, especially for the expertise and the value that we offer you.
Of course, totally. And again, because the recording and the deck will be sent to you in 1 to 2 business days. So you have the Stephen's contact. If you need a one-to-one consultations or you would like to ask more questions, please feel free to contact Stephen. I'm sure he's very happy to help.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in today. And thank you to Connecting Up for inviting.
And thank you, Stephen, for that. And we got another question from Rebecca. So how future looking do you have to be when writing your scope? If I was to data clean now, it is only immediate members as opposed to considering future donors and stakeholders.
Yeah, I think when you are configuring the CRM, you want to think into the future as best as you're able, and your supplier ought to be able to help you and guide you in that regard. Your supplier also ought to offer you best practice in the market and talk to you about trends and that sort of stuff. Otherwise, you might have chosen the wrong supplier. In terms of data, you'll be guided by the configuration in terms of what data you need to provide and how you need to provide it, and what fields you need and that sort of stuff. So I think the answer I've just given about being guided by the supplier, and also you having the initiative to think into the future as best as you're able, being guided by your organization's strategy and strategic plan and those sort of things. That's the best that you really can do. None of us can predict what the world's going to be like 5-10 years from now, but we certainly can look out the next few years.
Lovely, definitely. And I guess we got one, let me double check. So it's a very interactive section. We are really glad to have so many questions.
Yes.
All right, we got one last question here from Jeffrey.
Okay.
That I overlook. So does a CRM really provide a single source of truth about us customers? What do you think?
Absolutely. If it's configured right and used right and managed in a correct way, your CRM should be your single source of truth for all things, donors and other types of constituents. So absolutely, we try to make sure that it's a full view of every single constituent, no matter the constituent type, and that everything is tracked in the CRM about each and every constituent. So if you practice that, it does become a single source of truth. If any of that is not practiced and it's not managed in a best practice fashion after go live, then it's anybody's guess whether or not it's a single source of truth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen, for that.
Thank you.
And I guess that's pretty much for the questions today. So before we end, would you like to share anything?
No, I just want to say thank you again, and I hope everybody stays well in the current environment.
Lovely. Thank you again, Stephen. We really appreciate your hard work, your effort in doing this webinar. We'll have you again very soon. And before we finish, so we have a little credit at the end. Let me share my screen now. Okay, so it's basically on my screen. So we have another lovely events coming up next Tuesday. It's Switch On Your 2022 Social Media Strategy. So this webinar is basically next Tuesdays, and it tells you about how to create the social media strategies in a measurable ways, how to evaluate it, and it gives you the idea of how to do a community first approach in doing social media marketing. And most importantly, like the trend of this year. So I'm sure many of us would like to know 2022, what are the great tips, and then what are the new things we can discover. So if you're interested, please feel free to join us next Tuesday. I'll include a link into the follow-up email as well, so that you can just click on it and register. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Stephen, again. It's really great to have you. All right, we'll see you very soon, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.